What if Darth Vader arrived in World of Warcraft? The mechanical breathing that had terrorized a galaxy for decades now echoed through an alien forest as Darth Vader stood among the glowing crystals of an unknown world, his red lightsaber the only familiar light in this realm of magic and mystery. The explosion aboard the second Death Star had torn reality itself. As Emperor Palpatine's Force lightning collided with Luke's desperate counterattack, a rift in space and time opened like a wound in the universe. Vader, caught in the epicenter of this cosmic catastrophe, felt his consciousness scattered across dimensions before being violently reassembled in a place that defied all his understanding of the. He had crashed through what the locals called a moon gate, one of the silvery portals that connected the ethereal realm of Silvermoon City to the material plane. His TIE-advanced fighter lay in smoldering ruins, its twisted metal scattered across a grove of singing crystals that hummed with energies he had never encountered. These weren't the familiar currents of the dark side or the light. This was something entirely different, arcane, primal, and ancient beyond measure. Vader's breathing apparatus worked overtime as his systems analyzed the atmosphere. Oxygen levels were acceptable, but the air itself thrummed with magical energy that made his cybernetic components spark intermittently. His suit's life support systems, designed for the vacuum of space and toxic atmospheres, struggled to filter out the raw mana that permeated this world like radiation. Through the Force, he sensed life everywhere, not just the simple consciousness of beasts and plants he knew from other worlds, but something far more complex. There were beings nearby whose life energies burned with an intensity that rivaled Force-sensitive individuals, yet their power felt fundamentally different. Where the Force flowed like a river, this energy crackled like lightning, structured and controlled in ways that seemed almost technological. The sound of approaching footsteps broke his meditation. Vader turned his black mask toward the source, his hand instinctively moving to his lightsaber. Through the trees came figures that challenged his understanding of alien species. They were humanoid but ethereally beautiful, with pointed ears and eyes that glowed with inner light. Their skin held a pale, almost luminescent quality, and their movements possessed a grace that spoke of centuries of refinement. These were blood elves, though Vader had no name for them yet. A patrol of Silvermoon guards, led by Magister Rolmath himself, had detected the massive magical disturbance caused by his arrival. They approached with weapons drawn, not primitive swords and bows as Vader might have expected from a fantasy realm, but elegant blades that hummed with enchantment and staves that crackled with barely contained arcane energy. "Halt!" commanded Rolmath in Thalassian, his voice carrying the authority of one accustomed to absolute obedience. When Vader didn't respond, the Magister switched to Common, the universal language of Azeroth. "You will identify yourself, stranger. The energies surrounding your arrival have disturbed the Sunwell's harmony. Explain yourself, or face the consequences." Vader's vocabulator processed the unfamiliar language, his suit's translation protocols working frantically to decode the meaning. After a moment of mechanical breathing, he spoke, his voice carrying across the grove with the weight of absolute authority. "I am Lord Vader. I serve no one but the Emperor, and I bow to no alien species." His lightsaber ignited with its distinctive snap hiss, the red blade casting crimson shadows across the crystalline trees. "Stand aside, or be destroyed." The blood elves recoiled, not from fear but from confusion. The weapon in the stranger's hand was unlike anything they had encountered, pure energy contained and focused, similar to their own magical constructs but fundamentally different in nature. Rolmath's eyes narrowed as he studied this dark figure. The stranger's life force was wrong somehow, part machine and part organic, held together by what felt like raw will and pain. "Your technology is impressive," Rolmath admitted, raising his staff as arcane energy began to coalesce around him. "But you are in the realm of Silvermoon now, where magic reigns supreme. Your crude weapons cannot stand against the power of the Sunwell." Vader had faced Force users before, Jedi and Sith alike, but as the Blood Elf began to weave his spell, the Dark Lord realized this was something entirely new. The Magister wasn't drawing on life energy or the cosmic force. Instead, he was manipulating the fundamental forces of reality itself, reshaping matter and energy through pure intellectual understanding and will. A bolt of arcane energy lanced toward Vader, and he raised his lightsaber to deflect it. The beam struck the energy blade and scattered in all directions, scorching the crystal trees around them. But unlike deflecting blaster fire, this attack felt chaotic, unpredictable. The arcane energy seemed to resist his attempts to control it through the Force. "Interesting," Vader murmured, advancing through the scattered magical discharge. His cape billowed behind him as he moved with predatory grace, lightsaber held in a perfect gem-so stance. "Your powers are unfamiliar, but raw power without discipline is meaningless." He gestured with his free hand, reaching out through the Force to grasp Romath's throat. The Magister gasped as invisible fingers closed around his neck, lifting him from the ground. The other guards raised their weapons, but Vader's presence in the Force pressed down on them like a physical weight, inducing a primal fear that transcended species. "The dark side of the Force is a pathway to abilities many consider unnatural," Vader continued, tightening his Force grip. "You will learn to respect that power, or you will die." But Romath was no ordinary mage. Even as his airway constricted, he managed to complete a spell, wrapping himself in a barrier of pure arcane energy. The Force grip that had crushed the windpipes of rebel officers suddenly met resistance. Not the familiar pushback of another Force user, but something that existed on a completely different plane of reality. The barrier shattered under Vader's assault, but not before Romath had teleported away in a flash of purple light, reappearing 30 feet away with his staff already glowing for another attack. The Magister's eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. In all his centuries of study, he had never encountered power like this. Not magical, not divine, but something that seemed to exist in the spaces between realities. "Fall back," Romath commanded his troops in Thalassian. "Send word to Silvermoon immediately. We have encountered something unprecedented." As the Blood Elves retreated through another moon gate, vanishing in spirals of silver light, Vader found himself alone in the crystal grove. His breathing echoed through the supernatural silence as he processed what had just occurred. These beings possessed power that could resist the Force, something he had believed impossible. Their magic operated on principles that challenged everything he thought he knew about the nature of reality. But more importantly, they had retreated rather than fight to the death. This suggested a civilization, a hierarchy, possibly an empire, and where there was an empire, there were opportunities for conquest, for control, for the expansion of Sith influence into realms undreamed of. Vader deactivated his lightsaber and began walking in the direction the Elves had fled. His senses detected a massive concentration of life signs and energy readings ahead. A city, perhaps, or some kind of magical nexus. Whatever lay before him, it would serve the will of the Sith, or it would burn. The Force whispered of destiny and power, of a world ripe for conquest. As Darth Vader stepped through the alien landscape toward his date with the Blood Elves of Silvermoon City, he had no idea that his arrival would reshape not only this realm, but his own understanding of what it truly meant to wield power over life and death. The spires of Silvermoon City rose before Vader like golden needles piercing the sky, their crystalline surfaces refracting light into rainbow patterns that danced across the pristine white marble streets below. Never in his travels across the galaxy had he witnessed architecture that seemed to defy both physics and aesthetics so elegantly. The Imperial Palace on Coruscant paled in comparison to this alien majesty. As he approached the city's outer gates, Vader's sensors registered defensive systems unlike anything in Imperial databases. Floating crystals hummed with contained energy, creating barrier fields that shimmered like heat mirages. Automated constructs, not droids, but magical constructs made of pure arcane force, patrolled the perimeter with mechanical precision. These guardians possessed no life signs his equipment could detect, yet they moved with purpose and intelligence. The massive gates themselves were works of art rather than mere fortification. Carved from what appeared to be a single piece of enchanted crystal, they depicted scenes of triumph and magical mastery. Vader studied the imagery as he walked, noting how these beings had immortalized their victories over demonic forces and undead armies. Their history spoke of resilience and adaptation, qualities he could respect in potential subjects. Word of his encounter with Romath had clearly preceded him. The gates stood wide, but not in welcome. Instead, hundreds of Blood Elf guards lined the entrance plaza, their formation precise and disciplined. At their head stood a figure whose presence commanded immediate attention. Regent Lord Lorthamar Theron, his golden hair flowing beneath a circlet of power, his eyes burning with the characteristic fell-green glow of his people. "Stranger!" Lorthamar called out, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You have trespassed in our domain and threatened one of our most valued magisters. By what right do you walk our streets?" Vader halted 20 paces from the Regent Lord, his cape settling around him like shadows made manifest. Through the Force, he could sense the complex web of loyalties and fears that bound this military formation together. These soldiers were not mere conscripts, but trained warriors, each one burning with magical potential that rivaled Imperial Inquisitors. "I require no permission to walk where I choose," Vader replied, his respirator lending an otherworldly quality to his words. "Your Magister attacked me first. I merely defended myself with appropriate force." Lorthamar's expression remained unchanged, but several of his lieutenants shifted nervously. They had all heard Romath's report. The stranger's ability to choke someone without touching them, the energy blade that could deflect arcane magic, the presence that seemed to drain hope from the very air around him. "You speak of force, but you know nothing of our world's true power," Lorthamar continued, raising his hand to reveal a crystalline device that pulsed with concentrated Sunwell energy. "The light of the Sunwell flows through every citizen of Silvermoon. We are not so easily intimidated." The device activated, and suddenly every blood elf in the plaza began to glow with inner radiance. Their weapons blazed with holy fire, their armor shimmered with protective enchantments, and the air itself seemed to thicken with concentrated magical energy. It was a display of power meant to cow any potential threat into submission. But Vader had stood before the Emperor himself, had weathered the full fury of Sith lightning, had faced down entire fleets with nothing but his will and his connection to the dark side. This display of unified magical might impressed him, but it did not intimidate him. "Your light is bright," Vader acknowledged, igniting his lightsaber once more. The crimson blade seemed to absorb the holy radiance around it, creating a pocket of darkness that spread outward like an infection. But darkness consumes all light, given time. He reached out through the Force, not to attack, but to demonstrate. The very shadows cast by the Blood Elves began to deepen and writhe, responding to his will. Flowers in nearby gardens withered at their roots. The crystal constructs that patrolled the walls suddenly turned sluggish, their magical matrices struggling against an influence they had no programming to resist. Several of the younger guards stepped back involuntarily. This was not magic as they understood it, not the careful manipulation of arcane forces or the channeling of divine light. This was something that seemed to corrupt the very essence of reality itself, turning strength into weakness, hope into despair. "Enough," Lorthamar commanded, though Vader noted the slight tremor in the Regent's voice. "State your purpose here, stranger. Are you an agent of the Legion, a minion of the Lich King? Your powers reek of corruption, yet they follow no pattern we recognize." Vader deactivated his lightsaber, allowing the shadows to return to their natural state. He had made his point. These beings, for all their magical might, had never faced the true power of the dark side. They were like children playing with forces they barely comprehended. "I am neither demon nor undead," he stated flatly. "I am Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith, servant of Emperor Palpatine, master of a galaxy far from this realm. Your world interests me, Regent. Your people's mastery of energy manipulation shows potential." The name meant nothing to Lorthamar, but the title and bearing spoke of someone accustomed to absolute power. More troubling was the casual mention of ruling a galaxy. If true, it suggested resources and military might beyond anything Azeroth had ever seen. "You claim dominion over a galaxy, yet you stand alone in our city, Lorthamar. Where is this mighty empire you serve?" "Scattered across the void by betrayal and circumstance," Vader admitted with surprising honesty. "But empires can be rebuilt, Regent, especially with the right partnerships." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Lorthamar was no fool. He recognized a recruitment pitch when he heard one. But he was also a pragmatist who understood that sometimes dangerous alliances were necessary for survival. "Walk with me," the Regent said finally, dismissing his guards with a gesture. "Let us discuss your interests in a more private setting." As they walked through the pristine streets of Silvermoon, Vader observed everything with the calculating eye of a conqueror. The city was a masterpiece of magical engineering. Floating platforms transported citizens between levels, fountains flowed with liquid starlight, and the very air shimmered with beneficial enchantments that maintained perfect temperature and humidity. More importantly, he sensed the underlying tensions that plagued this seemingly perfect society. The Blood Elves were addicted to magic in ways that reminded him of the Emperor's hunger for power. Their beauty masked a desperate need that could be exploited by one who understood the true nature of desire and corruption. "Your people hunger," he observed as they passed a group of citizens, drawing energy from a public mana crystal. "I can taste it in the air. The constant need for magical sustenance. It is a weakness that your enemies surely exploit." Lorthamar's jaw tightened. "We have overcome our dependence on external sources. The Sunwell provides all we require now." "Does it?" Vader asked quietly. "Then why do I sense such careful rationing? Such precise control over every citizen's intake? You have not overcome your addiction, Regent. You have merely found a new dealer." The words stung because they contained uncomfortable truth. The Blood Elves had indeed broken free from their dependence on feel energy, but only by binding themselves even more completely to the Sunwell's power. They had traded one form of magical slavery for another, albeit a more palatable one. "You speak of matters you do not understand," Lorthamar replied coldly. "The Sunwell is sacred to our people. It is not mere addiction, but transcendence." "I understand addiction better than you might think," Vader responded, his respirator cycling as he drew breath. "My own life depends on machinery to sustain it. But I have learned to make my weakness into strength, my dependence into power. I could teach your people the same." They had reached the base of the Sunwell Plateau, where the restored font of power blazed like a captive star. Vader could feel its energy from here, pure, concentrated, and almost overwhelming in its intensity. Yet beneath that blinding radiance, he sensed something else. Potential for corruption, for transformation, for bending to a will strong enough to master it. "The dark side of the Force flows through all things," he murmured, staring up at the blazing well of light. "Even in sources of pure power, shadows can take root. Your Sunwell is magnificent, Regent, but it could be so much more." The chambers of the Convocation of Silvermoon buzzed with tension as news of the stranger's arrival spread through the highest echelons of Blood Elf society. Grand Magister Romath paced before an assembly of the realm's most powerful spellcasters, his hands still trembling from his encounter with the Dark Warrior's impossible abilities. "The entity calls itself Vader," Romath explained to the gathered magisters, his voice carrying the weight of genuine concern. "Its power operates outside all known magical principles. When I attempted to bind it with arcane chains, the spell simply dissolved. Not dispelled or countered, but consumed by some form of anti-magic that I've never encountered." Magister Hatherel, an ancient elf whose knowledge of forbidden arts rivaled even Romath's, leaned forward with interest. "You speak of consumption rather than negation. This suggests not the absence of power, but power of a different nature entirely. Perhaps we are dealing with energies from beyond the great dark beyond itself." The discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Lorthamar, who entered the chamber with measured steps that failed to hide his own unease. Behind him walked the subject of their debate, Vader himself, his mechanical breathing creating an unnatural rhythm that seemed to synchronize with the heartbeats of everyone present. "Esteemed Magisters," Lorthamar announced, "I present Lord Vader, who claims dominion over powers unknown to our world. He has requested an audience to discuss matters of mutual interest." The assembled spellcasters studied the Dark Lord with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. Here was someone who radiated menace like heat from a forge, yet carried himself with the bearing of true nobility. His every movement spoke of absolute confidence, of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous presence in any room. "Your reputation precedes you," Hatherel said, his ancient voice carrying centuries of accumulated wisdom. "Romath describes abilities that challenge our fundamental understanding of reality. Are you perhaps a visitor from the twisting nether? Your aura carries traces of energies we associate with that realm." Vader's mask turned toward the elderly mage, and despite lacking visible eyes, his gaze seemed to pierce straight through to the elf's soul. "The nether is unknown to me, but I recognize the touch of chaos when I encounter it. Your world has been touched by forces similar to those I have mastered: anger, hatred, the desire for power at any cost. He gestured toward a decorative crystal that adorned the chamber's center table. Without warning, the artifact began to darken from within, its pure light becoming tainted with veins of crimson energy that pulsed in rhythm with his breathing. Several magisters gasped as they felt their connection to the Sunwell fluctuate momentarily. "Impossible!" whispered Magister Astalor, his eyes wide with shock. "That crystal is directly attuned to the Sunwell itself. No external force should be able to corrupt its essence." "Nothing is impossible when you truly understand the nature of power," Vader replied, allowing the crystal to return to its original state. "Your Sunwell draws energy from positive emotions, hope, unity, the desire to protect and preserve. But all light casts shadows, magisters, and in those shadows true power awaits those bold enough to claim it." The demonstration had achieved its intended effect. Where before the magisters had viewed him as an interesting anomaly, they now recognized him as a genuine threat to everything they held sacred. Yet rather than fear, Vader sensed a different emotion beginning to emerge: curiosity. "You speak of corrupting the Sunwell as if it were a simple matter," Rometh challenged, his scholarly pride overriding his caution. "That font of power has been purified by the sacrifice of a Naru. It represents the purest form of holy energy in existence." "Purity is merely the absence of will," Vader countered, beginning to pace around the circular chamber. "Your Naru sacrificed itself to create this perfect source of energy, but perfection is stagnation. Power that never grows, never changes, never evolves. It is power wasted." He stopped before a massive tome that detailed the history of the Sunwell's restoration, his gauntleted hand hovering inches above the ancient pages. "Tell me, Magisters, what has your perfect power achieved? Have you reclaimed the glory of the Highborn? Have you expanded beyond this single city to claim dominion over lesser races? Or do you simply maintain your beautiful prison, sustained by light that demands nothing of you except gratitude?" The words struck home with uncomfortable accuracy. Since the Sunwell's restoration, the Blood Elves had indeed become more insular, more focused on internal matters than external expansion. They had achieved stability at the cost of ambition. "We have found peace," Lorthamar interjected, though his tone suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. "After centuries of struggle, we have earned the right to simply exist without constant warfare." "Peace is a lie," Vader stated with absolute certainty. "There is only passion. Through passion, I gain strength. Through strength, I gain power. Through power, I gain victory. Through victory, my chains are broken. The Force shall free me." The words resonated through the chamber with the weight of religious doctrine, and several of the younger magisters found themselves nodding unconsciously. There was something seductive about this philosophy, something that spoke to desires they had buried beneath layers of civilized restraint. Hatharel, however, recognized dangerous rhetoric when he heard it. "You speak like the Burning Legion spoke, of power without responsibility, of strength divorced from wisdom. We have seen where such paths lead." "Have you?" Vader challenged, turning his full attention to the ancient mage. "Or have you simply accepted defeat so completely that you mistake stagnation for wisdom? The Legion failed because it was chaos without purpose, destruction without construction. I offer something far more substantial: order backed by absolute power." He extended his hand toward one of the chamber's floating mana crystals and slowly, almost gently, began to draw its energy into himself. The magisters watched in amazement as the pure arcane force seemed to transform as it entered his being, becoming something darker but also more focused, more purposeful. "Your magic flows like water," he explained as the crystal dimmed. "Useful, certainly, but lacking direction. Observe what happens when that same energy is given proper structure." The absorbed mana erupted from his outstretched palm as a controlled torrent of dark lightning that carved precise geometric patterns into the chamber's stone floor. The display lasted only seconds, but its message was clear. He could not only resist their magic, but actively transform it into something entirely different. "This is merely a demonstration," Vader continued, his breathing apparatus cycling as he recovered from the exertion. "Imagine what could be accomplished if your entire civilization learned to channel power with such precision. Your enemies would become footnotes in history, your allies would become vassals, and your people would finally claim their rightful place as masters of this world." The chamber fell silent except for the mechanical rhythm of his respiration. Each magister was lost in their own thoughts, weighing the implications of what they had witnessed. Some, like Ramath and Hathoril, recognized the danger in Vader's seductive promises. Others, particularly the younger spellcasters who had grown restless with Silvermoon's peaceful isolation, began to see possibilities they had never dared to imagine. "You ask us to abandon everything we have built," Lorthamar said finally. "Our society, our values, our connection to the light, all of it cast aside for promises of power we do not fully understand." "I ask you to evolve," Vader corrected. "The strong survive, Regent. The weak are consumed. Your current path leads to slow decay as younger, hungrier civilizations surpass you. My path leads to dominion over all who would oppose you." He moved toward the chamber's great window, which offered a panoramic view of Silvermoon's gleaming spires. In the distance, the Sunwell's radiance painted the sky in shades of gold and amber, a constant reminder of the power that sustained their entire civilization. "Consider my words carefully," he concluded. "I have shown you only the smallest fraction of what the dark side can accomplish. But I will not wait indefinitely for your decision. Power abhors a vacuum, Magisters. If you will not seize the opportunities before you, others certainly will." 3 days after Vader's demonstration in the convocation chambers, the first cracks began to show in Silvermoon's unified facade. Magister Dathrohan, one of the younger council members, had been conducting secret experiments in the abandoned ruins beneath the city, attempting to replicate the dark energy manipulation he had witnessed. His screams echoed through the underground chambers as his first successful attempt consumed his left arm in writhing shadows before he managed to dispel the effect. Word of these unauthorized experiments reached Lorthamar through his network of loyal guards, confirming his worst fears about Vader's influence. The Dark Lord had planted seeds of ambition and discontent that were already taking root among the more impressionable members of their society. What troubled the regent even more was the realization that he himself had been entertaining similar thoughts during his sleepless nights. Meanwhile, in the guest quarters assigned to their dangerous visitor, Vader stood motionless before a wall-sized map of Azeroth, his breathing apparatus maintaining its steady rhythm as he studied the political complexities of this new world. Through careful questioning and observation, he had begun to understand the delicate balance of power that kept various factions from total war. The Alliance and Horde represented opposing philosophies, not unlike the eternal struggle between Jedi and Sith. The Alliance sought unity through shared ideals and mutual protection, while the Horde embraced strength through diversity and individual excellence. Both had their merits and both had weaknesses he could exploit. His contemplation was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. A young blood elf woman entered without knocking, her movements precise and controlled, despite the obvious nervousness that radiated from her presence. She wore the robes of a magistrix, but her demeanor suggested someone accustomed to more practical pursuits than academic study. "Lord Vader," she said, offering a respectful bow that nevertheless maintained her dignity, "I am Magistrix Eremia Daybreaker. I serve as liaison between the magical community and our military forces." Vader turned slowly to face her, his imposing presence filling the chamber despite his silence. Through the Force he could sense her internal conflict, fascination warring with duty, ambition struggling against ingrained loyalty. She was precisely the type of individual he needed to advance his plans. "You risk much by visiting me alone, Magistrix," he observed, his vocabulator lending an otherworldly quality to the words. "Your superiors would not approve of such initiative." "My superiors concern themselves with maintaining the status quo," Eremia replied, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "But I have studied our military reports, our intelligence assessments, our long-term strategic projections. Silvermoon faces threats that cannot be addressed through defensive posturing and diplomatic restraint." She moved to stand beside him at the map, her finger tracing the borders of various hostile territories. "The Scourge still maintains strongholds in the Plaguelands. The Amani trolls grow bolder with each passing season. Pirates raid our shipping lanes while we debate proper magical protocols. We have the power to end these threats permanently, yet we choose to simply endure them." "And you believe my methods could change this situation?" Vader asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. "I believe that power unused is power wasted," she stated firmly. "Our magisters spend centuries perfecting spells that could reshape continents, yet we use them only to maintain pretty fountains and comfortable temperatures. Our warriors train with weapons that could cleave through dragon scale, yet we deploy them only for ceremonial duties." Vader nodded approvingly. Here was someone who understood the fundamental truth that strength without application was merely elaborate weakness. "Show me these military assessments you mentioned. I would learn more about the threats facing your people." Eremiah produced a crystalline data storage device, activating it to project detailed holographic displays of enemy positions and strength estimates. The technology impressed Vader, not as advanced as Imperial holoprojectors, but elegantly efficient in its magical implementation. "The Scourge remnants here," she indicated a cluster of red markers in the Eastern Territories, "maintain approximately 15,000 undead troops under the command of various Death Knights and leashes. Our current strategy involves containment and gradual attrition through patrol actions." "Inefficient," Vader pronounced immediately. "Containment allows your enemies time to adapt, to find new sources of strength, to forge alliances with other hostile forces. Better to strike with overwhelming power and eliminate the threat entirely." "That has been my recommendation for months," Eremiah agreed, her excitement becoming more evident. "A coordinated assault using our most powerful battle mages could shatter their defenses in hours rather than years, but the Convocation insists on minimal risk strategies that accomplish minimal results." Vader studied the tactical display with the experienced eye of someone who had commanded starfleets in galactic warfare. The Blood Elves possessed individual combatants of extraordinary capability, but their strategic thinking remained constrained by centuries of defensive conditioning. They had forgotten how to be predators. "Your assessment is correct but incomplete," he told her, manipulating the holographic display to highlight additional factors. "The Scourge represents an immediate tactical threat, but observe the broader strategic picture. The Alliance maintains forces here and here, supposedly as mutual defense agreements. The Horde has bases in these locations, ostensibly for regional stability." His analysis painted a picture that Eremiah had only begun to recognize. Silvermoon was effectively surrounded by foreign military presences, all operating under the guise of friendship and cooperation. In reality, both major factions had positioned themselves to respond rapidly if the Blood Elves ever became a threat to the continental balance of power. "We are prisoners in a cage of treaties and obligations," she whispered, the full implications becoming clear. "Our allies would become our wardens the moment we attempted to expand our influence." "Now you begin to understand," Vader confirmed. "Your people have traded independence for the illusion of security. You have become dependent on the goodwill of potential enemies who tolerate your existence only as long as you remain useful and non-threatening." He moved closer to the projection, his presence causing the magical energies to fluctuate slightly. "But this situation also presents opportunities for those bold enough to seize them. Your current alliances are based on mutual weakness rather than mutual strength. Imagine instead a confederation based on fear and respect for overwhelming power." Eremiah felt a thrill of possibility course through her as she followed his logic. "You're suggesting we could force renegotiation of all existing treaties from a position of absolute superiority. I'm suggesting that treaties become irrelevant when one party possesses the power to enforce their will regardless of legal documents," Vader corrected. "The strong make the rules, Magistrix. The weak follow them or face the consequences." Before their conversation could continue further, the chamber's security wards activated with a crystalline chime. Lord Thamar entered with a guard escort, his expression thunderous as he observed the classified military intelligence being shared with their dangerous guest. "Magistrix Daybreaker," the regent said coldly, "you will return to your duties immediately. This briefing was neither authorized nor appropriate." "Regent," Eremiah began, but Vader's raised hand silenced her. "The Magistrix was merely providing cultural context for my education about your world," the Dark Lord stated smoothly. "Surely you do not object to your guest learning about local customs and recent history?" Lord Thamar's eyes narrowed as he recognized the careful phrasing that technically violated no protocols while completely subverting their intent. "Of course not. However, I must insist that future educational sessions be conducted through proper channels." "Naturally," Vader agreed, his tone suggesting complete compliance while promising nothing of substance. "I would not wish to cause administrative difficulties for your efficient bureaucracy." As Eremiah gathered her materials and departed with obvious reluctance, Vader noted the way her eyes lingered on him with newfound respect and anticipation. He had gained his first true convert among the Blood Elves, someone positioned to influence both magical and military planning. The seeds of his eventual takeover were beginning to sprout. "I trust you understand the delicate nature of our current situation," Lord Thamar said once they were alone. "Silvermoon maintains its independence through careful balance and diplomatic discretion. Rash actions could have consequences far beyond our borders." "I understand perfectly," Vader replied, his breathing apparatus cycling as he returned his attention to the map. "Your people have chosen survival over greatness, safety over glory. It is a rational choice for those who lack the strength to defend their ambitions." The insult was delivered so casually, so matter-of-factly, that it struck with greater force than any heated accusation. Lord Thamar felt his considerable pride flare in response, and in that moment of anger, he glimpsed the seductive appeal of Vader's philosophy. How much easier it would be to simply take what they desired, rather than endlessly negotiate for scraps of dignity. "Think carefully about your next words, Lord Vader," the Regent warned, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon. "Guest privileges extend only so far." "And yet you do not strike," Vader observed with apparent satisfaction, "because you know that I speak truth, however uncomfortable it may be. Your people possess power beyond the dreams of most civilizations, yet you use it like frightened children afraid of drawing attention from adults." The mechanical breathing filled the silence that followed, each cycle seeming to emphasize the weight of his words. Somewhere in the distance, the sunwell continued its eternal radiance, unaware that its perfect light was beginning to cast very dark shadows. The first signs of Vader's growing influence manifested in ways Lord Thamar had not anticipated. Blood Elf patrol formations began adopting more aggressive stances against border incursions. Young magisters started experimenting with spell combinations that prioritized raw power over elegant efficiency. Most disturbing of all, the crime rate in Silvermoon's lower districts had plummeted to zero, as would-be criminals found themselves paralyzed by inexplicable waves of fear whenever they contemplated illegal activities. The source of this supernatural deterrent became clear when intelligence reports reached the Regent's private study. Vader had begun taking solitary walks through the city's most troubled neighborhoods, his mere presence radiating an aura of menace that discouraged antisocial behavior more effectively than any patrol or surveillance system. Citizens reported feeling compelled to confess minor infractions to authorities after encountering the dark figure, as if his proximity awakened dormant feelings of guilt and inadequacy. "He's conditioning our population," Hathoril warned during an emergency session of the Inner Council. "This psychological manipulation represents a form of mass mind control that operates below the threshold of conscious awareness. Our people are being trained to associate order with his presence, authority with his approval." Romath nodded grimly as he reviewed the latest batch of incident reports. "The younger magisters are beginning to incorporate his philosophical concepts into their research proposals. They speak of passion-driven spellcraft and emotion-channeled energy matrices, as if these were legitimate academic pursuits rather than pathways to corruption." "Perhaps," Lord Thamar mused, surprising his advisors with his thoughtful tone, "we should consider the possibility that his methods, however unsettling, are producing beneficial results. Crime reduction, increased military readiness, enhanced scholarly innovation, these are not inherently negative developments." The other council members exchanged worried glances. If even their level-headed regent was beginning to rationalize Vader's influence, then the corruption had spread further than they had feared. Their discussion was interrupted by an urgent communication crystal that flared to life in the chamber's center. The image that formed within its faceted depths showed Commander Helios Dawnstrider, leader of their forces stationed near the Ghostlands border, his normally composed features etched with concern. "Regent," Helios reported, his voice crackling through the magical transmission, "we have a situation that requires immediate attention. The Amani trolls have mobilized their entire war host and are advancing toward our outer settlements. Intelligence suggests they've formed an alliance with Scourge remnants and several orc clans from the mainland." Lord Thamar leaned forward, his attention fully focused on the tactical implications. "Numbers and estimated time to contact?" "Approximately 8,000 hostiles moving in coordinated formations that suggest professional military leadership rather than tribal raiding parties. They'll reach our first defensive positions within 18 hours. Regent, this isn't a simple border skirmish. This is a full-scale invasion. The news struck the council like a physical blow. Such a massive coalition of enemies hadn't been seen since the Third War, and the timing seemed suspiciously convenient given their current internal tensions. Someone had clearly decided that Silvermoon's apparent distraction made them vulnerable to assault. "Initiate full mobilization protocols," Lorthamar commanded. "Recall all patrol units to defensive positions and activate the barrier crystals around our outlying communities. We'll need to coordinate with Alliance forces to—" "Forgive the interruption, Regent," came Vader's unmistakable voice from the chamber's entrance. He stood in the doorway with Magistrix Eremia at his side, both having arrived with the silent efficiency that characterized the Dark Lord's movements. "But I believe this crisis presents an opportunity rather than a threat." "Lord Vader," Hathril said stiffly, "this is a closed session dealing with classified military intelligence. Your presence is neither required nor appropriate." "My presence becomes appropriate when your people face annihilation," Vader replied, moving into the chamber despite the obvious disapproval of most council members. 8,000 enemies advancing in coordinated formation suggests outside assistance. Someone with knowledge of modern military doctrine has been training these primitive forces. Eremia activated a portable projection device displaying updated intelligence that she had apparently been authorized to share. "Our reconnaissance has identified the presence of several Death Knights among the Troll leadership, along with what appears to be at least one Dreadlord coordinating their strategic planning. This is more than a local uprising. It's a deliberate attempt to eliminate Silvermoon as a regional power. All the more reason to request immediate Alliance support," Romath insisted. "King Varian has pledged to defend our sovereignty in exchange for our continued magical assistance with his military campaigns." "Has he?" Vader asked, his tone suggesting intimate knowledge of political realities that the Magisters preferred to ignore. "And how quickly can his forces reach your borders? How many troops can he spare from his ongoing conflicts with the Horde and his internal security concerns? Most importantly, what price will he demand for such assistance?" The questions hung in the air like accusations because everyone present knew the uncomfortable answers. Alliance support would come slowly, in insufficient numbers, and with strings attached that would further erode Silvermoon's independence. They would survive the immediate crisis only by trading more of their autonomy for foreign protection. "There is another way," Vader continued, his mechanical breathing emphasizing each pause in his proposal. "Your forces are individually superior to any enemy you face. Your magical capabilities exceed anything these primitives can field. Your only weakness is the defensive mindset that prevents you from utilizing your advantages effectively." He gestured toward the tactical display, dark energy crackling around his fingertips as he manipulated the projected battlefield. "Observe what becomes possible when you abandon containment strategies in favor of annihilation doctrine." The map transformed under his influence, showing potential assault vectors that the Blood Elf military had never seriously considered. Instead of defensive positions designed to slow enemy advances, he outlined rapid strike formations that would shatter opposing forces before they could bring their numerical advantages to bear. "Preemptive strikes against their staging areas while they're still spread out across difficult terrain," he explained, his tactical analysis demonstrating the strategic thinking that had once commanded Imperial fleets. "Concentrated magical bombardment of their leadership elements to disrupt command structures. Surgical elimination of their supernatural advisors before they can coordinate defensive countermeasures." Eremia stepped forward, her eyes bright with the excitement of someone finally seeing her strategic theories validated. "The approach is sound, Regent. We've been planning for defensive engagements when our strengths favor offensive operations. A single squadron of our best battle mages could accomplish more in one decisive strike than months of border patrol actions." "What you're describing is naked aggression," Hathril protested. "Attacking enemies before they actually threaten our territory violates numerous treaties and established rules of engagement." "Treaties written by the weak to constrain the strong," Vader dismissed. "Your enemies are already committed to your destruction. They are simply approaching it through conventional means that allow you time to request help from distant allies. I propose ending this threat immediately using resources you already possess." Lorthamar found himself genuinely torn between competing impulses. His training and experience demanded caution, careful coordination with established allies, measured responses that preserved diplomatic relationships. But another part of him, a part that had been growing stronger since Vader's arrival, recognized the brutal logic of the Dark Lord's proposal. "The tactical assessment has merit," he admitted reluctantly, "but implementing such strategies would represent a fundamental shift in our military doctrine. The political ramifications will become irrelevant once your enemies lie dead and your people stand victorious," Vader finished. "Political consequences matter only to those who lack the strength to ignore them. You face a choice, Regent. Preserve your reputation for diplomatic restraint while your cities burn, or embrace the power necessary to ensure that your people never face such threats again." Commander Helios's voice crackled through the communication crystal once more, urgency evident in his tone. "Regent, the enemy advance has accelerated. They've abandoned their supply trains and are moving at forced march pace. Whatever decision you make needs to happen now." The chamber fell silent except for the mechanical rhythm of Vader's breathing apparatus. Every person present understood that they stood at a crossroads that would define not only their response to this immediate crisis, but the fundamental nature of their civilization going forward. "Magistrix Daybreaker," Lorthamar said finally, his voice carrying the weight of momentous decision. "Prepare strike teams according to Lord Vader's tactical recommendations. But understand, if this approach fails, the responsibility falls on all of us." "It will not fail," Vader stated with absolute certainty. "Overwhelming force applied with precision and without hesitation has never failed to achieve victory. Your enemies expect the defensive, reactive Silvermoon they have always known. They will face something entirely different." As urgent preparations began throughout the city, none of the council members noticed the slight smile that would have been visible beneath Vader's mask. The first step in any successful conquest was convincing your targets to abandon their principles in favor of your methods. Once they had tasted the intoxicating efficiency of absolute force, returning to their previous restraints would become psychologically impossible. The dark side had found fertile ground in Silvermoon, and soon it would bear fruit that would reshape the entire balance of power on Azeroth. The pre-dawn sky above the Ghostlands erupted in crimson lightning as Vader's tactical doctrine received its first field test. 3 strike teams of Blood Elf battle mages, coordinated by Magistrix Eremia and guided by the Dark Lord's strategic principles, descended upon the scattered enemy camps with devastating precision. The ancient forests, accustomed to centuries of careful skirmishing and measured responses, witnessed something entirely unprecedented. Total war waged with magical superiority. Vader himself observed the assault from a hilltop overlooking the primary battlefield, his cape billowing in the supernatural winds generated by the massive expenditure of arcane energy below. Through the Force, he could feel each moment of the engagement as if he were personally delivering every killing blow. The fear radiating from the enemy forces as they realized their numerical advantage meant nothing against focused, overwhelming power provided him with a satisfaction he had not experienced since commanding Star Destroyers in Imperial space. "Target the shamanic totems first," he instructed through the communication crystals, linking all strike teams. "Their spiritual defenses cannot withstand concentrated dispelling techniques combined with aggressive force projection." Below, Magister Aelindra led her squadron in a devastating aerial bombardment that turned troll war totems into smoking craters. The spiritual anchors that had protected the advancing army for generations crumbled under spell combinations that the Blood Elves had never attempted in actual combat. Where traditional doctrine called for careful surgical strikes to minimize collateral damage, Vader's approach demanded complete obliteration of enemy capabilities, regardless of environmental impact. The results spoke for themselves. What should have been an 18-hour advance to Blood Elf defensive positions became a rout that lasted mere minutes. Troll berserkers who had survived encounters with dragons found themselves paralyzed by waves of supernatural terror as Vader projected his presence across the battlefield through the Force. Death Knights who had endured decades of undeath discovered that their immunity to fear and pain meant nothing when faced with power that operated on existential rather than physical principles. "Magnificent," breathed Commander Dawnstrider through his crystal communicator. "The entire northern column has collapsed. They're fleeing back toward the mountains in complete disorder." "Do not allow them to escape," Vader commanded coldly. "Enemies who retreat become enemies who return with reinforcements and improved tactics. Ensure that no survivors reach their home territories with knowledge of your capabilities." The order hung in the communication network like a poison. Traditional Blood Elf military doctrine emphasized honor in victory, mercy toward defeated foes, and proportional response to enemy actions. What Vader demanded went against centuries of established protocol and violated numerous treaties regarding the treatment of retreating forces. Lord Vader, Eremiah's voice carried uncertainty for the first time since embracing his philosophy. The pursuit and elimination of routed enemies could be considered a war crime under Alliance standards. The political ramifications will be managed by those who understand that dead enemies create fewer political complications than living ones, Vader interrupted. Victory without consequences is victory wasted. Complete your objectives, Magistrix. Through the Force, he sensed the moment when Eremiah made her choice. Her hesitation dissolved into grim determination as she transmitted new orders to her strike teams. The moral line that separated defensive warfare from outright massacre had been crossed, and once crossed, it could never be uncrossed. The systematic hunting of fleeing enemies continued throughout the morning, each pursuit unit reporting successful interceptions with clinical efficiency. Troll warriors who had terrorized settlements for decades simply vanished into the morning mist, their passing marked only by scorch marks on ancient trees and the lingering scent of ozone from discharged magical weapons. By noon, 8,000 hostile forces had been reduced to scattered groups of traumatized survivors, hiding in caves and attempting to contact their home tribes through increasingly desperate magical communications. The coalition that had seemed poised to threaten Silvermoon's very existence had been effectively annihilated in less than 6 hours of actual combat. Unprecedented, Lorthamar admitted when the final casualty reports reached his command center. Our losses were minimal. 3 wounded, none killed. Enemy losses approached 90%, with the remainder scattered and no longer militarily significant. Results achieved through proper application of superior force, Vader observed, his satisfaction evident even through his mechanical voice modulation. Your people have remembered how to be apex predators rather than merely another species competing for survival. The tactical success was undeniable, but the strategic implications sent ripples of concern throughout the broader Alliance intelligence network. King Varian's advisors noted the unusual aggression displayed by forces that had previously operated under strict defensive mandates. Night Elf sentries reported witnessing magical techniques that bore disturbing similarities to highborn battle magic from the War of the Ancients. Draenei refugees spoke of sensing dark energies emanating from the direction of Silvermoon that reminded them uncomfortably of Legion corruption signatures. The Blood Elves have changed their fundamental approach to conflict resolution, reported Jaina Proudmoore during an Emergency Alliance leadership conference. Their response to this tribal uprising demonstrated capabilities and willingness to use force that we've never observed before. Someone or something has altered their strategic thinking in ways that could affect the entire continental balance of power. Her concerns were echoed by intelligence reports flowing in from multiple sources. Dwarven scouts noted increased Blood Elf patrol activity along borders that had been quiet for years. Human merchants reported sensing unusual tensions during trade negotiations, as if their elven counterparts had developed an entirely different perspective on their relative positions in regional politics. Meanwhile, in Silvermoon itself, the victory celebration took on characteristics that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. Young magisters openly discussed the intoxicating sensation of wielding lethal force without restraint. Military officers debated which neighboring territories might benefit from similar defensive interventions to ensure long-term regional stability. Citizens who had lived their entire lives within carefully maintained diplomatic boundaries began to question why they had ever accepted limitations imposed by foreign powers. We could extend our influence far beyond traditional borders, suggested Magister Kaelin during a post-battle analysis session. The Amani Highlands contain resources that we've been forced to purchase at inflated prices due to troll territorial claims. Those claims no longer exist in any meaningful sense. Expansion requires justification under current treaty obligations, Hatherell warned, though his protests sounded increasingly hollow, even to himself. We cannot simply seize territory because we possess the military capability to do so. Cannot? Vader interjected, having entered the chamber with his characteristic silent approach. Or choose not to. Your recent victory has demonstrated that capability and will are the only meaningful constraints on action. Legal documents become irrelevant when one party possesses overwhelming force. He gestured toward updated territorial maps that reflected the power vacuum created by the morning's operations. Vast stretches of previously contested land now lay effectively unclaimed, their former inhabitants either dead or scattered beyond any hope of organized resistance. "Your people have tasted true victory for the first time in generations," he continued, his presence seeming to fill the chamber despite his motionless stance. "The question now becomes whether you will build upon this success or retreat back into the comfortable prison of diplomatic restraint." The debate that followed revealed the depth to which Vader's influence had penetrated Blood Elf society. Arguments that would have been dismissed as extremist just days earlier now received serious consideration from respected leaders. The psychological transformation from defensive thinking to aggressive opportunism had been remarkably swift, aided by the undeniable effectiveness of his tactical approach. "The Sunwell's energy signature has been fluctuating since the battle," reported Romath during a private consultation with Lord Thamar. "The massive expenditure of magical force seems to have created some kind of resonance effect. More troubling, the emanations are beginning to carry traces of what I can only describe as dark side contamination." Lord Thamar nodded grimly. "I've sensed it too. Our victory came at a price that extends beyond simple casualties. Something fundamental has changed about our connection to the light." Neither elf spoke the obvious conclusion that Vader's influence was not merely philosophical, but actively transforming the very source of their civilization's power. The Sunwell, restored through Naru sacrifice and maintained through dedication to holy principles, was beginning to reflect the aggressive ambitions of those it sustained. As evening fell over Silvermoon, the city's spires glowed with their usual radiance, but careful observers might have noticed subtle shifts in the spectrum of light being emitted. Where once the illumination had been purely golden, now there were hints of crimson threading through the luminous displays, as if the very foundations of their society were being slowly but inexorably corrupted by contact with power that demanded no limits and accepted no restraints. The transformation of Silvermoon accelerated dramatically in the weeks following their crushing victory over the Troll Coalition. Where once citizens had moved through the city's pristine streets with the measured grace characteristic of their ancient culture, now there was an urgency, an edge of predatory confidence that manifested in everything from business negotiations to casual conversations. The very architecture seemed to reflect this change, as traditional flowing designs were augmented with sharper angles and more imposing geometries that spoke of power rather than beauty. Vader had established his primary residence within the Sanctum of the Sun, the ancient repository of Blood Elf magical knowledge, claiming he required access to their arcane libraries to better understand local conditions. In reality, his presence there served a far more insidious purpose. Every spell, every ritual, every theoretical framework studied within those halls now carried the subtle influence of dark side philosophy. Students who entered seeking knowledge of healing magic emerged with expertise in techniques that could drain life force as easily as restore it. "The applications are remarkable," enthused apprentice Thalisra as she demonstrated her latest discovery to a gathering of fellow scholars. "By inverting the traditional energy flow patterns in restoration spells, we can create effects that strengthen the caster while weakening targeted subjects. It's far more efficient than conventional approaches." Her audience watched in fascination as she channeled what appeared to be standard healing magic toward a captured rabbit, only to drain its vitality to enhance her own magical reserves. The creature aged visibly before their eyes, its fur graying and its movements becoming sluggish as its life force flowed into the young elf's glowing hands. "Magnificent technique," observed Master Thorelius, one of the senior instructors whose approval would have been unthinkable for such practices just months earlier. "Have you documented the theoretical framework for peer review?" "Lord Vader assisted with the mathematical formulations," Thalisra replied proudly. He explained how emotional resonance can be used to amplify spell effects beyond traditional limitations. "Anger specifically provides remarkable enhancement to both power output and efficiency of magical absorption." The casual mention of Vader's involvement sent subtle ripples of excitement through the gathered scholars. The Dark Lord had become something of a legend within academic circles, his unconventional theories producing results that challenged every established principle of magical education. Students competed for opportunities to discuss their research with him, each hoping to gain insights that would revolutionize their chosen fields of study. Meanwhile, in the political arena, Lord Thamar found himself navigating increasingly complex diplomatic pressures as word of Silvermoon's aggressive new stance spread throughout the Alliance network. King Varian had requested a formal explanation for the excessive force employed against the Troll Coalition, while Night Elf representatives expressed concern about the environmental damage caused by unrestricted magical bombardment in the ancient forests. "They fear what we have become," Vader observed during a private consultation in the Regent's chambers. "Your allies accepted your previous weakness because it posed no threat to their own interests. Now that you have demonstrated true strength, they seek to contain you through diplomatic manipulation and moral pressure." Lorthamar studied the pile of formal protests and concerned inquiries that had accumulated on his desk throughout the week. Each document represented another attempt by supposed allies to dictate Blood Elf policies based on their own comfort levels rather than Silvermoon's security needs. "The political complications are significant," he admitted. "Varian threatens to reconsider our alliance membership if we continue what he terms unprovoked aggression. The Night Elves speak of imposing trade sanctions to pressure us toward more conventional military doctrines." "Empty threats from those who lack the strength to enforce their will," Vader dismissed. "Your King Varian commands human armies whose individual soldiers could not match a single Blood Elf battle mage. Your Night Elf critics possess ancient forests that would burn quite beautifully if properly motivated. They pressure you only because they believe you will submit to pressure." The Dark Lord moved to the chamber's great window, which offered a panoramic view of the city's transformed skyline. Where once Silvermoon's spires had reached toward the heavens like prayers made manifest, now they resembled weapons pointed at the sky, their crystalline surfaces reflecting light in ways that suggested barely contained aggression. "Demonstrate that their assumptions are incorrect," he continued, his breathing apparatus maintaining its mechanical rhythm. "Show them that the new Silvermoon responds to pressure with overwhelming force, rather than diplomatic accommodation." "You're suggesting we risk open conflict with the Alliance itself?" Lorthamar asked, though his tone suggested the idea held more appeal than it should have. "I am suggesting that you clarify the new reality of continental politics," Vader corrected. "The Alliance exists only as long as its members find cooperation more beneficial than domination. Once one member becomes sufficiently powerful to impose its will on the others, the Alliance becomes an empire with a single ruler." Before their conversation could continue, urgent alarms began sounding throughout the city. The crystalline warning systems that monitored Silvermoon's borders blazed with energy as massive magical disturbances registered on every detection grid simultaneously. Through the great window, both leaders could see flashes of purple and gold light erupting from the direction of the Sunwell Plateau. "Impossible," Lorthamar breathed, recognizing the energy signatures that accompanied only one phenomenon in their recorded history. "Those readings indicate the return of Kael'thas Sunstrider," Vader finished, his voice carrying a note of genuine interest for the first time since arriving in their world. "How fascinating. Your former prince has chosen a most opportune moment to reclaim his birthright." Through the Force, Vader could sense the approaching presence long before any magical detection system could analyze it properly. Prince Kael'thas had indeed returned to Azeroth, but not as the elf who had once ruled Silvermoon with wisdom and restraint. This was something far more dangerous, a being who had embraced phoenix fire and demonic power in equal measure, transforming himself into a creature of pure magical will, wrapped in the memories of fallen nobility. "He will sense the changes we have made to his city," Lorthamar said, his voice tight with anticipation and dread. "Kael'thas was always protective of Silvermoon's traditions. If he perceives our new direction as corruption or betrayal, then you will have an opportunity to demonstrate whether your people have truly evolved beyond their previous limitations," Vader interrupted. "Your former prince represents the old ways, the defensive mindset that nearly led your civilization to extinction. You represent the new path, the aggressive approach that has brought victory and expansion. The confrontation that was building would serve Vader's purposes perfectly, regardless of its outcome. If Lorthamar and his transformed forces could defeat their returning prince, it would cement their commitment to his philosophy and eliminate the last major obstacle to his influence over their society. If Kael'thas proved victorious, then Vader would have gained valuable intelligence about Phoenix-based magic systems while positioning himself to manipulate a former prince who had already demonstrated willingness to embrace extreme methods for power. "Summon your war council," he instructed the regent. "Your people must understand that this represents more than a personal challenge from their former ruler. This is a test of everything you have become, a trial that will determine whether Silvermoon embraces its destiny as a dominant force or retreats back into the comfortable mediocrity of its past." As magical energies continued to build toward critical levels around the Sunwell Plateau, citizens throughout the city began to feel the pressure of approaching forces that defied easy categorization. The phoenix flames that heralded Kael'thas's approach carried with them echoes of fell corruption and divine transformation, creating resonance patterns that interfered with the dark side energies Vader had been cultivating within their sacred font of power. "The Sunwell is responding to his proximity," reported Ramath through emergency communication crystals. "The harmonic frequencies are becoming unstable. If these conflicting energies reach critical resonance, the resulting explosion could level the entire plateau." Or, Vader suggested, with what might have been amusement in his mechanical voice, "it could create something entirely unprecedented. Your Sunwell has been touched by Naru sacrifice, Phoenix transformation, and now the power of the dark side. Perhaps it is time to discover what emerges when such forces are allowed to achieve synthesis rather than opposition." The very idea sent shudders through every magically sensitive individual within the city's borders. What Vader proposed went beyond mere corruption or transformation. He was suggesting the creation of a completely new form of magical energy that incorporated elements from every source that had ever influenced their sacred well. The potential for either transcendence or catastrophic destruction seemed equally probable. "Kael'thas approaches with forces unknown," Lor'themar announced to his assembled commanders. "But we are no longer the same people he once ruled. We have learned the true meaning of strength, the proper application of power, the necessity of decisive action. Let him come. He will find that Silvermoon has evolved far beyond his understanding." The stage was set for a confrontation that would reshape not only the political landscape of Azeroth, but the fundamental nature of magical power itself. As Phoenix flames began to manifest on the horizon, answering energies stirred within the corrupted depths of the Sunwell, and somewhere between light and darkness, a new form of power prepared to be born. Prince Kael'thas Sunstrider materialized above the Sunwell Plateau in a corona of phoenix fire that turned the afternoon sky into a canvas of gold and crimson. His transformation since his apparent death had been profound. Where once stood an elf of regal bearing and scholarly demeanor, now hovered a being of pure magical essence, wrapped in memories of mortality. Phoenix wings spread wide behind him, each feather blazing with energies that had been reforged in the heart of dying stars. Silvermoon, his voice echoed across the city with the resonance of distant thunder, carrying power that made windows tremble and caused weaker magical constructs to overload. "I have returned to reclaim what was stolen, to restore what was corrupted, to cleanse what has been defiled by shadow and ambition." From the Sunwell itself he drew forth fellow Malorn, the ancient blade that had once belonged to his ancestor, Darth Vader Sunstrider. The weapon blazed with phoenix fire that seemed to burn reality itself, its flames casting shadows that moved independently of any physical object. This was not merely a sword enhanced by magic, but a manifestation of pure will given tangible form. Vader observed the dramatic arrival from the highest balcony of the Sanctum of the Sun, his mechanical breathing creating a counterpoint to the supernatural winds generated by Kael'thas's presence. Through the force he could sense the complex web of energies surrounding the returned prince, phoenix essence intertwined with fell corruption, divine transformation layered over mortal ambition, and beneath it all, a core of absolute determination that reminded him uncomfortably of his younger self. "Impressive," he murmured, though whether in appreciation or calculation remained unclear. "The prince has learned to embrace transformation rather than resist it. A valuable lesson that his subjects would do well to remember." Throughout Silvermoon, citizens emerged from their homes and businesses to witness the return of their former ruler. The sight that greeted them defied every expectation they had harbored about Kael'thas's fate. This was not a humbled prince seeking forgiveness for past mistakes, but an avatar of power that had transcended the limitations of mortality itself. "People of Silvermoon," Kael'thas declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the city despite requiring no magical amplification, "I have witnessed the corruption that has taken root in our sacred halls. I have seen how shadow masquerades as strength, how fear disguises itself as wisdom, how submission presents itself as evolution." His gaze swept across the transformed cityscape, noting the aggressive architectural modifications and the subtle but pervasive aura of dark side influence that now permeated their culture. The Sunwell itself pulsed with conflicting energies that spoke of fundamental corruption beneath its radiant surface. "This ends now," he continued, raising fellow Malorn toward the sanctum where he sensed the source of the contamination. "I offer one opportunity for redemption. Cast out the shadow that has poisoned your judgment, return to the path of light and honor, and I will cleanse the damage that has been done to our people's soul." The ultimatum hung in the air like a blade poised to fall. From his vantage point, Vader could sense the collective response of the city's population. Fear warring with defiance, loyalty conflicted by ambition, the comfort of newfound strength battling against ancestral reverence for their prince's authority. Lord Themar's response came not in words but in action. The regent emerged onto the central plaza accompanied by his most trusted commanders and battle mages, each bearing weapons that crackled with the enhanced magical techniques they had learned under Vader's tutelage. Their formation spoke of professional military discipline rather than ceremonial honor guards. This was a force prepared for war, not diplomacy. "Prince Kael'thas," Lord Themar called out, his voice amplified by crystalline resonators that ensured his words reached every citizen. "You speak of corruption, but I see only strength. You claim to offer redemption, but you come bearing threats against your own people. The Silvermoon you knew was weak, defensive, constantly begging for scraps of respect from lesser powers. We have evolved beyond such limitations." The confrontation crystallized with startling clarity as both sides recognized the fundamental incompatibility of their worldviews. Kael'thas represented the old ideals of their civilization: honor, tradition, careful balance between power and responsibility. Lord Thamar embodied their new philosophy: strength through dominance, growth through conquest, security through overwhelming force. "You have been deceived," Kael'thas replied, his phoenix wings spreading wider as magical energies began to coalesce around him. "The shadow that whispers in your councils offers only the illusion of power while binding you to its will. I have seen where such paths lead, to servitude disguised as mastery, to corruption presented as evolution." "And yet," came Vader's voice from the balcony above, finally choosing to make his presence known, "you return bearing powers drawn from fell corruption and phoenix transformation. Are you not yourself proof that strength requires sacrifice of previous limitations?" The Dark Lord stepped into view, his cape billowing dramatically as he ignited his lightsaber. The crimson blade cast harsh shadows across the plaza below, its energy signature creating visible distortions in the magical fields that surrounded both the Sunwell and Kael'thas himself. "So," Kael'thas said, his attention focusing entirely on this new threat, "you are the architect of my people's corruption. I sense no magic in you, yet you wield power that bends reality to your will." "What manner of entity are you?" "I am what your people could become if they possessed the courage to embrace their potential," Vader replied, leaping from the balcony with force-enhanced grace that carried him slowly, deliberately to the plaza floor. "You speak of corruption as if purity were a virtue, of shadow as if light were strength. You understand nothing of true power." The confrontation that followed transcended mere physical combat. As Kael'thas descended from his position above the Sunwell, phoenix flames trailing behind him like a burning banner, the very air between the two combatants began to distort with conflicting energies. Where phoenix fire met dark side emanations, reality itself seemed to struggle to maintain coherence. "Your philosophy is seductive," Kael'thas admitted, raising fellow Malorn in a defensive stance that nevertheless radiated offensive capability. "But I have walked that path. I have embraced fell corruption in the name of strength, sacrificed allies for the promise of power, betrayed everything I once held sacred in pursuit of transformation. The end result is not mastery, but slavery to forces beyond mortal comprehension." "Then you lacked the will to truly master what you sought to control," Vader countered, his lightsaber weaving complex patterns as he advanced. "Power serves only those strong enough to command it absolutely. Your failure was not in seeking strength, but in accepting limitations upon how that strength could be applied." Their first exchange sent shockwaves through the plaza that shattered windows throughout the lower city. Fellow Malorn met the lightsaber's crimson blade in a shower of sparks that burned with impossible colors, each impact releasing energies that had never before interacted in the history of either universe. Phoenix fire sought to purify, while dark-side corruption fought to transform, creating a stalemate that neither combatant could easily break. "Remarkable," Kael'thas observed as he parried a series of precise strikes, his phoenix wings providing both balance and additional offensive capability. Your weapon operates on principles entirely foreign to magical theory, yet it demonstrates effectiveness against even phoenix-enhanced enchantments. The Force transcends the limitations of local magical systems, Vader explained, pressing his attack with methodical precision. Your phoenix fire burns bright, Prince, but even stars eventually exhaust their fuel. The dark side is eternal, fed by emotions that exist in every sentient being across all realities. Around them, the citizens of Silvermoon watched with a mixture of terror and fascination as two beings of immense power fought for the very soul of their civilization. Each clash of weapons sent ripples through the Sunwell itself, causing the sacred font to pulse with increasingly unstable energies as it struggled to process the conflicting influences acting upon it. Magistrix Eremia and her reformed battle mages maintained defensive positions around the plaza's perimeter, ready to intervene if their new philosophy appeared to be losing against their former prince's righteous fury. Yet even they began to question their allegiances as they witnessed the awesome display of Kael'thas's transformed capabilities. "He's not the same prince who left us," whispered Commander Sunstrider to his lieutenant. "Whatever he's become during his absence, it rivals anything we've achieved through Lord Vader's teachings." The battle was far from over, but already its implications were reshaping the political landscape of Azeroth. Reports of the confrontation were being transmitted through magical communication networks to Alliance leaders, Horde intelligence services, and neutral observers throughout the continent. The question was no longer whether Silvermoon would change, but what form that change would ultimately take. As Phoenix Fire clashed with lightsaber energy above the most sacred site in Blood Elf culture, the future of an entire civilization hung in the balance between competing visions of power, responsibility, and the price of transformation. The duel between Phoenix Prince and Dark Lord reached a crescendo that threatened to tear reality itself apart at the seams. Kael'thas unleashed torrents of phoenix fire that turned the very air into molten streams of golden energy, while Vader responded with force lightning that carved through the magical flames like cosmic serpents seeking their prey. The Sunwell Plateau became a cauldron of competing energies that defied every known law of magical interaction. "Your power burns brightly, Prince," Vader acknowledged as he deflected another devastating fireball with his lightsaber, the crimson blade spinning in perfect defensive arcs. "But brightness without purpose is merely spectacle." Kael'thas soared higher on wings of pure flame, gaining tactical advantage while channeling energies that drew directly from the Phoenix constellation itself. His transformed nature allowed him access to powers that transcended normal magical limitations, yet even he was beginning to feel the strain of maintaining such intense combat against an opponent whose abilities operated outside all familiar frameworks. "Purpose?" Kael'thas laughed, the sound carrying notes of both bitter experience and genuine amusement. "You speak to me of purpose while corrupting my people with promises of dominion? I have seen what your kind of purpose creates. Worlds burned to ash in service of appetites that can never be satisfied." He swept fellow Malorn in a wide arc that sent cascading waves of phoenix fire across the entire plaza, forcing Vader to retreat momentarily while citizens fled to safer distances. The ancient blade sang with harmonics that resonated through the Sunwell itself, drawing power directly from the sacred font in ways that its creators had never intended. But Vader was far from defeated. As the phoenix flames washed over his position, he reached deep into the dark side, channeling not just his own power, but the accumulated fear and ambition of every blood elf who had embraced his philosophy. The shadows cast by Kael'thas's brilliant flames began to writhe and coalesce, forming tendrils of pure darkness that struck back with surgical precision. "Your flames reveal the shadows they create," Vader observed, his breathing apparatus cycling as he prepared for his next assault. "And in those shadows I find strength that your light cannot touch." The shadow tendrils wrapped around Kael'thas's ankles and wrists, not seeking to bind him physically, but to drain the phoenix energies that sustained his transformation. For a moment, the returned prince felt his powers wavering as dark side corruption sought to unravel the carefully maintained balance between fell and divine energy that comprised his current existence. "Impossible!" he gasped, feeling decades of accumulated magical knowledge being pulled into the void-like hunger of Vader's assault. "Phoenix fire cannot be corrupted or consumed. It exists beyond the reach of shadow magic." "Phoenix fire, perhaps," Vader agreed, tightening his force grip as he advanced for what might be a killing blow. "But you are not pure phoenix, Prince. You retain traces of mortality, fragments of ambition, memories of pain and loss. And through those weaknesses, the dark side finds purchase." The realization struck Kael'thas like a physical blow. His transformation had indeed been incomplete, leaving him vulnerable to exactly the type of corruption that Vader wielded so masterfully. The fell energies he had absorbed during his time with Illidan created resonance points that dark side power could exploit, turning his own accumulated strength against him. But understanding his vulnerability also suggested a solution. With an effort that sent shockwaves through the magical field surrounding the Sunwell, Kael'thas began to purge the corrupted elements from his own essence. Phoenix fire blazed hotter and brighter as he cast off the fell contamination that had sustained him for so long, accepting the risk of losing power in exchange for purity that could not be compromised. "Interesting choice," Vader commented, sensing the shift in his opponent's energy signature. "You choose weakness over strength, limitation over potential. You prove my point about the inadequacy of your philosophy." "I choose clarity over confusion," Kael'thas corrected, his form now blazing with phoenix fire, so pure it seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time. "Power derived from corruption carries the seeds of its own destruction. Better to wield less force with complete control than limitless energy that ultimately serves another's will." The purification process had indeed reduced Kael'thas's raw power output, but it had also made him effectively immune to Vader's corruption techniques. The dark side tendrils that had been draining his essence simply passed through him now, finding nothing to grasp or corrupt in his refined state. Their renewed combat took on characteristics that bordered on the metaphysical. Vader's lightsaber techniques, perfected through decades of warfare against Force users, met Kael'thas's centuries of magical knowledge in exchanges that created visible distortions in local reality. Where the crimson energy blade struck Phoenix Flame, the resulting explosions opened temporary rifts that revealed glimpses of other dimensions entirely. Around them, the observing Blood Elves were experiencing their own crisis of faith. Watching their former prince battle against the being who had promised them dominion over their enemies, many began to question which path truly offered salvation for their people. The tactical effectiveness of Vader's methods was undeniable, but Kael'thas's demonstration of purification suggested that such power came with hidden costs. "Look how he shines," whispered Magister Elindra, her voice filled with wonder and confusion. "The prince burns with light that makes the Sunwell itself seem dim by comparison, yet Lord Vader matches him blow for blow using only shadow and will." "Because both paths lead to strength," observed Magistrix Eremia, though uncertainty now colored her previously absolute confidence. "The question becomes whether we can accept the price demanded by either choice." The philosophical battle was being fought simultaneously on multiple levels. In the physical clash between lightsaber and enchanted blade, in the magical struggle between light and shadow, and in the minds of every blood elf who witnessed the confrontation. Each exchange of blows represented competing visions of their civilization's future, alternative paths that could not coexist. As the duel continued, the Sunwell itself began to respond to the conflicting energies in ways that alarmed every magically sensitive observer. The sacred font's radiance flickered between golden purity and crimson corruption, as if it was struggling to choose between the philosophical influences acting. Harmonic frequencies that had remained stable for years began to shift into dangerous resonance patterns. "The well is destabilizing," reported Romath through emergency communication crystals. "The competing energy signatures are creating interference patterns that could cascade into complete magical collapse. If this continues, we could lose the Sunwell entirely." The warning reached both combatants simultaneously, and for a moment their personal duel took secondary importance to the realization that their conflict was threatening the very source of Blood Elf civilization. The irony was not lost on either participant. In fighting for the soul of their people, they risked destroying the foundation upon which those souls depended. "Enough!" Kael'thas declared, pulling back from his assault and raising Felomalorn in a gesture that was part threat and part plea. "Our battle endangers everything we both claim to protect. Would you see Silvermoon destroyed to prove your philosophy superior?" Vader paused in his advance, his lightsaber still active, but no longer moving in aggressive patterns. Through the Force, he could sense the cascading instabilities building within the Sunwell's core matrix. The sacred font was indeed approaching critical failure, torn between the competing influences that had been imposed upon its originally pure nature. "The choice is yours, Prince," he replied, his mechanical breathing emphasizing each word. "Submit to the inevitable evolution of your people, and the Sunwell stabilizes under unified purpose. Continue your resistance and accept responsibility for the catastrophe that follows." It was a masterful psychological gambit, placing the burden of decision entirely on Kael'thas, while positioning Vader as the voice of pragmatic necessity. Yet the returned prince recognized the manipulation for what it was, an attempt to use his own protective instincts against him to force surrender through manufactured crisis. "There is a third option," Kael'thas said quietly, his phoenix wings folding as he made a choice that would reshape the destiny of not just Silvermoon, but potentially all of Azeroth. "If the Sunwell cannot survive the conflict between our philosophies, then perhaps it must be transformed into something capable of encompassing both light and shadow without choosing between them." The implications of his words sent shudders through every observer who possessed sufficient magical knowledge to understand them. What the prince proposed was not merely dangerous but potentially revolutionary, the creation of a new form of magical energy that incorporated elements from every source that had ever influenced their sacred well. The transformation of the Sunwell began with Kael'thas plunging Philomalorn directly into the sacred font's blazing core, his phoenix essence merging with energies that had been purified by Naru sacrifice and corrupted by dark side influence in equal measure. The resulting explosion of magical force sent shockwaves across the entire continent, causing every mage from Dalaran to Stormwind to pause in their studies as reality itself seemed to hiccup. Vader watched with genuine fascination as the prince initiated a process that defied every strategic calculation he had made about this confrontation. Rather than choosing between light and shadow, Kael'thas was attempting to forge them into something entirely unprecedented. A synthesis that could theoretically harness the strengths of both philosophies while avoiding the weaknesses that made each vulnerable to the other. "Ambitious beyond reason," Vader murmured, deactivating his lightsaber as he observed the magical storm building around the Sunwell. "You seek to create what has never existed, power without corruption, strength without sacrifice, dominion without submission to darker impulses. I seek to evolve beyond the limitations that have trapped both our philosophies in eternal conflict." Kael'thas, his voice strained with the effort of channeling energies that threatened to tear him apart on a molecular level. "Light alone breeds stagnation. Shadow alone breeds destruction. Together, properly balanced, they might achieve something greater than either could accomplish in isolation." The process was agonizing to witness. Phoenix fire and dark side energy, Naru light and Fel corruption, all swirled together in patterns that should have been mutually exclusive, yet somehow, through Kael'thas's will and the unique properties of the Sunwell itself, the impossible began to take shape. A new form of magical energy emerged from the chaotic mixture, neither purely light nor completely dark, but something that incorporated elements of both, while transcending the limitations of either. Throughout Silvermoon, citizens felt the change as a physical sensation that penetrated to their very souls. The constant hunger for magical sustenance that had defined Blood Elf existence for generations simply disappeared. In its place came a sense of balance, of completeness that they had never experienced even during the Sunwell's original glory. They were no longer addicted to external sources of power because they had become sources of power themselves. "Remarkable," Vader admitted, sensing through the Force how the transformation was affecting not just individual elves, but their entire civilization. "You have achieved what the Emperor himself only theorized, the creation of beings who exist simultaneously in light and shadow without being consumed by either." The Dark Lord found himself facing a situation he had never encountered in all his years of conquest and manipulation. The Blood Elves were indeed evolving beyond their previous limitations, but not in the direction he had intended to guide them. Instead of becoming servants of the dark side, they were becoming something that could potentially resist both light and shadow-based influences, while wielding the strengths of each. Lor'themar approached the transformed Sunwell with wonder evident in his expression. The sacred font now blazed with energies that shifted between crimson and gold in patterns that seemed to respond to the emotional states of those who observed it. When he felt aggressive ambition, the crimson elements brightened. When he experienced protective compassion, the golden aspects intensified, yet neither dominated the other completely. "This changes everything," he breathed, understanding immediately that the political ramifications would reshape the entire continental balance of power. We're no longer dependent on alliance protection or vulnerable to horde aggression. We've become something entirely new. "Indeed," Kael'thas agreed, withdrawing fellow Malorn from the well's core and noting how the blade itself had been transformed by the process. The sword now burned with flames that incorporated every element that had ever influenced his people: Phoenix fire, Fel energy, Naru light, and even traces of dark side corruption, all bound together in perfect harmony. "We are no longer merely blood elves. We have become something unprecedented." Vader studied this transformation with the calculating mind of someone who had spent decades analyzing the political implications of power shifts. The new Silvermoon represented neither a potential conquest nor a manageable threat. These evolved beings possessed capabilities that made traditional concepts of alliance and domination largely irrelevant. They had become truly independent in ways that most civilizations could never achieve. "You have won a victory I did not anticipate," he admitted with what might have been respect. "Your people have achieved synthesis where I sought domination, balance where I imposed control. The outcome is educational. The question becomes what you do with that education," Kael'thas replied, his attention turning fully to the Dark Lord who had catalyzed these unprecedented changes. "Your philosophy of absolute power has served its purpose by providing the shadow elements necessary for our transformation. But continued adherence to purely dark side principles would destabilize what we have created." The implicit ultimatum was clear: adapt to the new reality or be expelled from. Vader found himself in the unique position of having succeeded too well in his corrupting influence, creating a situation where his presence was no longer beneficial to his own goals. Yet as he contemplated his options, something unexpected occurred. The transformed Sunwell's energies began to affect him as well, penetrating even his heavily shielded cybernetic systems to touch the few remaining organic components of his existence. For the first time since his transformation into Darth Vader, he felt the possibility of balance rather than constant internal conflict between his mechanical and biological aspects. "Fascinating," he murmured, allowing the well's hybrid energies to flow through his damaged body. "Your synthesis affects even those who were not originally part of your people. The implications for my own condition are intriguing." The revelation opened possibilities that none of the participants had considered. If the transformed Sunwell could offer balance to someone as thoroughly corrupted as Vader, it might represent a path toward redemption that did not require the complete abandonment of power. The Emperor's most feared enforcer could potentially become something entirely different without losing the strength that had made him formidable. "The choice is yours," Kael'thas offered, echoing Vader's earlier words but with an entirely different meaning. "Embrace synthesis and discover what you might become when no longer bound by the absolute demands of either light or shadow. Or retain your commitment to pure dark side philosophy and accept that your path leads away from Silvermoon forever." Around them, the transformed city gleamed with new energies as citizens explored capabilities they had never possessed. Battle mages discovered they could heal as effectively as they could destroy. Healers found they could defend as powerfully as they could restore. The artificial divisions between different schools of magic began to dissolve as practitioners learned to channel abilities that transcended traditional classifications. The political ramifications were already beginning to manifest. Alliance observers reported that Silvermoon no longer responded to diplomatic pressure or incentives in predictable ways. Horde intelligence services noted that traditional threat assessments had become meaningless when applied to beings who could simultaneously embody opposing philosophical principles. The new Blood Elves were becoming a third faction that fit into neither established power structure. "You have created something that will reshape this entire world," Vader observed, his breathing apparatus cycling as he processed the full implications of what he was witnessing. "Traditional concepts of alliance and opposition become irrelevant when dealing with beings who exist beyond such simple categorizations." "That was always the goal," Kael'thas confirmed. "Not to choose between existing options, but to transcend the limitations that made such choices necessary. Our people have suffered enough from being forced to pick sides in conflicts that served other powers' interests rather than our own." Idida. As the sun set over the transformed Silvermoon, casting shadows that seemed to dance with light rather than oppose it, Vader made his own choice. The dark side would always be part of who he was, but perhaps it need not be the only part. The possibility of existing as something more complex than a simple servant of shadow offered opportunities he had never dared to imagine. "I will remain," he announced, his voice carrying new undertones that his vocabulary had never produced before. "Not as conqueror or corrupter, but as student. Your synthesis intrigues me in ways that simple domination never could." The transformation of Silvermoon was complete, but its effects were only beginning to ripple outward across Azeroth. Where once the world had been divided between alliance and horde, light and shadow, order and chaos, now there existed a third option: balance, synthesis, the possibility of transcending limitations that had seemed absolute. In the years that followed, other civilizations would study what had been achieved in Silvermoon, some seeking to replicate the transformation, others working to defend against its implications. But the fundamental nature of power itself had been forever changed by the convergence of forces that should have been mutually exclusive, proving that even the most ancient conflicts could be resolved through sufficient will and wisdom. The galaxy far, far away had given Azeroth an unexpected gift, not conquest or corruption, but the catalyst for an evolution that would reshape the very foundations of magical civilization. And perhaps in learning to balance light and shadow, the peoples of this transformed world might offer their own gifts to powers beyond the stars.